Welcome, everyone. I'm Kristen Hipwell, the Director of Product Marketing with Perfection Learning, and I'm excited to have each of you joining us for tonight's AP Lit webinar, The Final Countdown, Last-Minute Thoughts on the AP English Exams. Before we get started, just two quick items. One, if you have questions during the webinar, please be sure to post them in the chat section at the bottom of your screen. Your questions will be addressed throughout the session as appropriate and at the end of the webinar. And two, Perfection Learning will be sending out an email tomorrow with both the webinar recording and the slide deck used. It's my pleasure to introduce our expert teachers for this evening. Dr. BrandonAbdon comes to us with over 20 years of experience in the classroom, including 12 years as a high school English teacher, many years as a professor of English and education, and time as a curriculum developer and instructional coach. In addition to the time he spent in the classroom, Brandon has more than 10 years of experience as a consultant, and he formerly worked as the lead director for the International Advanced Placement Program at the College Board. But I like to say that our favorite credential on Brandon's resume is as senior author of Perfection Learning's AP Literature and AP Language coursebooks by AMSCO. Tonight, we are actually joined by some additional guests. Susan Barber is an AP Lit educator, College Board advisor for AP Literature, and she frequently leads ELA workshops across the country. She also serves as a moderator for the AP Literature and Composition Teachers Facebook group. And we also have a student joining us tonight. James is currently a freshman at Bard College, where he is double majoring in studio art and architecture. And he took the AP Lit exam when he was a senior. So he'll be sharing his experiences with us as well. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for sharing your knowledge. And I'm going to pass the presentation off to you.
Thank you so much, Kristen. And I am beginning to share my screen with everybody. And I'm going to ask my colleagues if you all could give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. Oh, fantastic. Thank you, James. Thank you, Susan. All right, everybody. Welcome and thank you again for joining us. Go ahead and drop in the chat. Some of you are already doing it. You've seen it. Drop in the chat where you're coming at us from. It's great to see people from around the country and around the world. I see Chino Hills High School in California. There's Nashville, Tennessee. I love Nashville, Lauren. I'm not far from you. I love it. All right. We got Texas. Susan, I'm not seeing any Georgia yet.
I'm seeing some Georgia.
Yeah. Oh, James. Somebody here is attending Bard this upcoming fall. We got a student in here. So you got to write a name down, maybe share an email later on. You all can private chat if you want. Great. There's Macon, Georgia. There's Atlanta, Georgia. Fishers, Indiana. Amy, I know Fishers pretty well. So we got anybody else in the South here? North Carolina. There we go. There's Noonan, Georgia. Right. People all over. Neptune, New York. All right. We got some students in here coming at us from South Florida. Man, all over. So thank you all so much for being here. Of course, you'll have access to contact us later on if you've got any questions about anything, and you will get the recording of this and you'll get a copy of this deck as well. But we really wanted to focus on this, calling this the final countdown, because that's where we are, y'all. I mean, we've got less than a week at this point. I've already got my tweets set up for the day of or the day before the exam, ready to go out. That I always send out. And but if you've been doing this, following this for a while, already know what they say. But today is really going to be about exam chat. And we've got the expertise of James here too. And James, that word drives me nuts, expertise. It sets the expectations so high, I know. But I think there are so many teachers really excited to hear from a student who's been through the exam. And this is really where I want us to start today. So Susan, I'd like you to think about your students, and James, you think about for yourself, like what was I most prepared for? But also those of you who are joining us, in that chat, go ahead and drop in that chat box. What do you think your students are the most prepared for. So Susan, you're on the spot now. What do you think?
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm ready to jump on in. Thanks for being with us, everybody. Always excited to talk AP Lit, and just what a fun time of the year. Like the energy, I'm going to answer your question. But the energy.
Take your time. You're fine.
The energy, there's this shift of energy in my classroom. Tomorrow we're on an AB schedule. So tomorrow's an A day, Friday is a B day. And because of AP testing next week, tomorrow is really the last time that I will see some of my students before the AP exam. So tomorrow is our last day. And like I said, you feel this shift of energy from this, instruction to now just like this settling and this relaxation. And we're excited. I passed back essays. Our last essay I passed back earlier this week, and students, we were thinking about how much we had improved throughout the course of the year. And so there's just this energy of celebration of just what we've done. And now it's just time to show what you know. So we're ready. So what are my students most prepared for? I tend to, and I'd love to hear what James thinks about this. So I tend to think of myself, you have two components, reading and writing, and several things that circle around that. I tend to think I lean a little more into the writing instruction. I tend to be a writing teacher at heart. I think my students are going into this ready to write essays, especially I would think the poetry essay. We spend a lot of time in my class on poetry because I feel like we're having to make up for kind of lost time or either bad experiences with poetry before they come to me. So we spend a lot of time on poetry. I think they're ready for the poetry essay. I think they're ready for the essays in general. Multiple choice is always the part in my class that's a little more like, that could go anyway, but writing we usually feel pretty good about.
So James knows what's coming. And so I kind of want James to think about like, what did you feel most prepared for, James?
I would say the thing that, I also felt pretty prepared for the essays, I'd say, going off of what Miss Barbara said. But I would actually say that the essay I felt most prepared for was question 3, because the two other ones, question 1, question 2, I would have like no idea what kind of text it was going to be on yet. But at least for question 3, I could like have some idea of what text I wanted to write about, even if I didn't know exactly what the prompt was yet. So I guess just because I knew the subject so well already, I felt the most prepared for question 3 of the essay. But I would say the essays overall, I did feel pretty well prepared for.
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk to us a little bit about question 3? What did you do? Because you said you felt so prepared for it, well prepared for it. What did you do to prepare for that one specifically?
I remember a couple of days before the exam, I went over the texts that I knew that I would possibly want to write on, which were Frankenstein, Fences, and this book called Feed that I read the year prior. So I just kind of went back over those texts and like relooked at themes and characters and dynamics, just so I knew just so I knew like character names, and I knew like themes to connect to possible prompts and what kind of like figurative analysis and figurative language they may have used in those texts.
You're talking about Feed. I think I know the book you're talking about. I think it's M.T. Anderson.
Yeah,
It's the one
by
I'm
M.T.
thinking about it. Yeah. I've had a lot of students.
Did you read that for the dystopian choice?
I think James is frozen, unfortunately,
Oh, okay. We'll come
but
back to it.
I know it
Right,
is that
student.
kind of novel. It
I
is.
read
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
in AP Lang.
Okay. Oh, good. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
We do a dystopian choice. That's our very last book that we do. Students get to choose, and students choose a wide range of books. So feed definitely fits into that. But I think that's a great point too, that sometimes it's not even like the books that we read in AP Lit that are good choices to use. It's what books you most connect with, right?
Yeah. It's going to be the book that students, that what I tell them, I'd like you to use some of these books because these are ones that we know are of, and I don't like this phrase, but literary merit, right? But ultimately, I want you to write about what you know the best and what you care about, because you're going to be able to get the best essay out of that. So, great. So, and no, James, you're great. You're not frozen anymore now. You're perfectly fine. Great. So I've seen a couple things come up in the chat here that teachers are talking about things that they're prepared for, or that they feel their kids are prepared for, and a couple of students talking what they're prepared for, and they're echoing what you said about poetry, Susan. A lot of students are saying, "Hey, I feel like I'm ready for poetry."
Love it.
Both Benjamin Stroud and Char Lindemulder use the phrase attacking the prompts. Both of them saying that independently, and I like it. Like they are ready, and students are ready to jump into it. And then we get Aaron talking about they're ready to annotate the prompts. I love that idea of annotating the prompts. And so students aren't just reading and marking things up; they're thinking about that marking in relation to what the question is asking them. So I love seeing you all sharing some of these too. So now I do see some things where people are asking about things they're concerned about. And that's our next one. What are students least prepared for? And James, I'm going to put you on the spot with this one. So just thinking about, a year ago, almost a year ago, going in, what did you, before the test, you felt the least prepared, or after the test, you're like, whoa, I was not ready for this? Go ahead.
I felt the least prepared for the multiple choice.
Mhm.
I mean, we did like a good amount of multiple choice practice in the weeks following, but I mean, in the weeks prior to the test, but still with multiple choice, it can be kind of tricky because sometimes there can be like multiple answers that seem like they'd be the right answer, but you really have to find like the perfect right answer. So the multiple choice can get a little tricky.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
Susan, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, that totally multiple choice. I feel like that's what we do the least amount of practice with, because it just feels so test preppy. And I know there are ways to not make it test preppy, and I've not mastered all of those ways yet. So I don't do as much of that as maybe I should, but I just feel like if, we're giving our students opportunities to read closely, and to really think critically about passages and some multiple choice practice, then it's gonna be okay. That's my approach. I don't recommend that approach for everybody, but I mean, I don't know. I always feel like that's where students feel the least prepared.
Yeah, I agree with you just based on working. Well, I was in a classroom in Lexington, Kentucky yesterday, and I was in a classroom down the road here from me today, and students were telling me the same thing. This, regardless of the practice, I feel least prepared. And I think that the most difficult thing about the multiple choice, as I talk to students and teachers, is, with the essays, we have the prompts, and they can contextualize things for us. They tell us what this is, what they're talking about a little bit. But with that multiple choice, it is a completely cold read. Mm-hmm. And y'all, it's the AP exam, national, international exam. It's not interesting in many cases, or not interesting to most people. I mean, as an English major, you might be interested in it, But there's a lot of Dickens on the test, and I just don't like Dickens. I'm going to get nasty emails about that. I know it, but I can handle that.
I'm with you. So go ahead and help me on that.
Right. But so the thing that I suggest to teachers to try with students is to ask them to read the question stems first, because so often the question stems can give you some context. There was one we were looking at the other day where one of the question stems said, which of the following is the best indicator of the humorous and ironic tone of this passage? And it told everybody that what they were about to read was supposed to be ironic. And that's huge. And so I encourage people to check that out, but that doesn't work for everybody. And not every question is like that. And so it may not always work, but that's one thing I suggest, because I do feel students are least prepared for that. And the timing of it, like you really have just a certain amount of time per passage, I think. So there's a couple of things popping up here in the chat. I think it's worth looking at here. Somebody said that they feel like the students are least prepared for the language that comes up in some of those older passages. Susan, how do you talk to students about navigating some of that pre-20th century? It's often pre-20th century prose or I guess verse too.
Yeah, so like you, I encourage my students to read the passage, read the stem, the question stem, no answer, read the question stem first before you read the passage. So a couple of things, that's gonna already, just reading the stems, it's gonna give you some context about what you're reading about, because it may say, you know, the conflict between so-and-so and so-and-so. So already, there's conflict between these two characters. So now I don't have to spend, especially in an older text, as much time deciphering that. And, one thing I tell my students is if you just get totally lost in a section, look for the subject and look for the verb. What is happening? Who is it happening to? Then you can kind of chunk in around that. But also one thing that I stress is don't let what you don't understand overshadow the parts that you do understand. So really lean into the parts that you do understand. Yes, read through, and try to make sense of the parts that you don't understand, but don't get so bogged down in it that it eats up all of your time. And just let the questions guide you through those sections of the test. Don't try to spend 10, 15 minutes deciphering like an old prose passage, and then you run out of time to answer your questions.
Thank you, Susan. I mean, it's like we're reading from the same book, I think, with that. And I want to kick it over to James too, because I know students often develop their own kind of approaches or strategies for attacking those kinds of texts. What do you think of, James?
So oftentimes when I was doing like the multiple choice practice and there was a prose aspect, I would read the question stems first, and then I would go back and read the prose, and I would kind of like underline or circle specific things that stood out, whether they related to the question or whether it was a word that I didn't necessarily understand. And then I would try to use like the context clues within the same sentence to try to figure out what it could possibly mean. Because I didn't read too many books outside of class. And so I especially didn't read any like olden English books. So I just had to kind of try to use what was already there on the page to figure out what it meant. And oftentimes it works pretty well. Like it's pretty doable, I'd say.
And so, James, I'm going to put you on the spot here again. You've gotten to university now. You're reading texts and things like that. I'm sure. I'm going to assume, and if I'm wrong, tell me. But I'm going to assume you're using similar strategies as you read these texts that you're having to take for courses that may be new to you. Like you're having to use these decoding strategies to read textbooks, just like you did these old texts. Am I right?
Yeah, I definitely say so. Annotation is a big thing in my life now with all my readings. And like whether it's like a textbook or like a chapter book that I have to read for class, I'm always have my pencil, maybe sticky notes, maybe even a highlighter, and like going through and marking things that stand out.
Yeah, thank you for that, because I want us to recognize, all of us as lit teachers, we get so lost sometimes in our lit world that we forget we're teaching literacy skills
Right.
to kids. And so taking the time to, with high school seniors, if you're teaching seniors, I know some of you are teaching lit to juniors, maybe even freshmen, but teaching those skills of context clues and decoding are really important, not just for our course, but for other classes too. And I was working with a class, a school a couple months ago, and they were talking about how important that decoding aspect was to their history classes. And so just remember that, it's okay to slow down and take that time and unpack a sentence and help kids learn how to do that. It helps them, not just for the exam, but I digress. So great comments here. I think Susan loves hearing James give this kind of feedback, because she's like, yes, it worked.
I just like to hear that students go on and annotate, because it's like whenever I'm like, we're going to pull out this section of a novel and annotate it, and everybody's like, oh, so.
I know. I love it. So, and the other thing that I love about, it's a test taking skill, but I think it matters beyond the test. Yes, reading the question stems first is something they only do for the test, but it helps them know when they're reading what to pay attention to, because when we're reading something cold, we don't know what's important yet.
Mhm.
But reading the stems helps us kind of narrow down, oh, okay, I need to be focusing on these sorts of things, because if not, it turns out kind of like my college biology book was. I think I highlighted everything in orange. And then I realized, wait a minute, if everything's important, then nothing is. So what am I going to do here?
Mhm.
All right. So James, I want you to think about this and how you reviewed in the last week, and everyone else, I want you to think about, what are you doing in that last week before the exam to help your students review? And while everybody types and while James thinks about that, Susan, I'd like you to kind of tell us, what are you doing in this last week? I mean, what are your plans for tomorrow?
So tomorrow, we are going to do this thing where we walk through prompts, and I have all the, prompts that are individually on a large note card, all the past prompts. And then I just have a series of questions like, what book would you, or what do you think this prompt is asking? Like, what is the true writing task of this prompt? What book would you use? What character would you use? What significant scene would you use? I write all of those down on different pieces of paper, and I spread them out across the English hallway. Students pair up and choose a random prompt, and they walk with a partner through and just talk about their prompt, and then they circle back around and choose another prompt. So reviewing books, I really like that. It's like kind of a different theme on speed dating, that's kind of thing, just where you're looking at multiple prompts. I know Brian Stabnick this week did musical chairs, kind of the same thing. You sit in a chair, you have the prompt. So just having students look at a lot of different prompts and think about the books that they have read and which ones will fit where. I think by this time of the year, and especially with the amount of writing that we've done, it's always encouraging for students to do this, because they realize oh, not just I know these books, but now I know how to think and pull information and write this literary analysis. They've developed those thinking skills. So that's always an encouraging thing. So we're doing that tomorrow. My students are finishing with their dystopian novels, doing some scene to theme work. So that will be really fresh on their minds. And the other thing that we're going to do tomorrow is write our exam plan, just where they think about, am I going to write the questions in order? what multiple choice strategies do I want to use? So they're not sitting down to the exam, and they're thinking like, oh, I wonder if I should do that. Like, I want the plan in place on exam days, so they're not wasting any time. They know what they're going to do when they walk into the exam. And I think that builds confidence too, because it just gives them more agency over the exam. Like, I mean, students have choice when they go into the exam. Like they are the ones who are taking this exam, and they can do it in any way, in the way that they're most comfortable doing. So we'll talk about our exam plan tomorrow, and they'll actually write it out for me. For
So
them.
I love this. And what's I'm sure is happening. There are teachers right now on this call who are replanning tomorrow based on things you've offered. And I think that's great. And before James, I come to you, I just need to celebrate the people on this call and on this webinar, because so much of what I'm seeing in the chat is about building student confidence and reminding students that you got this. And they do. And it's so frustrating. I know when with the class I was working with today, this student, she was very quiet, but what she was offering was so good. And she kept starting everything with basically. And I was like, stop with the basically. What you're talking about is a very complex idea, and you deserve credit for it. It's not a basic concept. And she took that and she ran with it, and you could just see her kind of open up, and people in the room were just so excited about it. She was doing that. And that's great. They're not English majors, so they're not going to be super confident, but they can do this. And we've seen them grow over the year. One final thing before I come to James is I had a person share in the language session that we just did, the idea of having them go back to their first essays in the year and look at those essays and see, oh gosh, look how far I have come since then. And that
Actually,
can
I
really,
wrote that down during the Lang session. I'm like, tomorrow, look at the first essay. Like,
yeah.
I'm changing my plans too.
There you go. I love it. I love that. That is so good, Susan. Thank you for sharing that. That's great.
Mhm.
So James, in this last week, what were you doing? And man, if you say sleeping and eating right, that's totally fine.
Yeah, 100%.
So go ahead, James.
I recall doing the things that Miss Barber just mentioned in her class, and then I also went back and looked through, like I refreshed myself on the text that I possibly wanted to write on for question 3, and then I slightly, like briefly looked over some of the multiple choice practices that we did in class, just for one more little brush up before the exam. But other than that, I didn't really do like too much to review. Yeah, sleeping and eating,
Mhm.
these were very big, because I feel like this exam isn't something that necessarily has like definite answers to it.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like you can't really like study specifically or like try to memorize like an answer to this. You just kind of have to know like the strategies to use.
Mhm.
So it felt like it wouldn't have really made sense to try to like super cram last minute. So instead, I just wanted to like not stress myself out and enjoy the like pretty much the last week of high school, I believe. So
Yeah. So this is our students' last, so that's the other thing going on, like where we are. Our students' last day is May 10th, like our seniors' last day. So like I said earlier, like tomorrow and Friday will be the last days that my AP Lit classes that we're together as a class before kids, all these kids are out with different exams. And so this is like the last regular week of high school for us. So yeah, like we want our students to enjoy, I don't want them to be so stressed out. And like James said, you shouldn't be stressed out. You've done the work all year. So now let's just enjoy it.
Yeah, and I love the person who shared in the last session. They said the day before the exam, when they're in the last class, I think the person said the last class that I see them for the exam because, my students had so many exams going that sometimes I didn't see them.
Right.
But it was just board games. Just, hey, we're just going to play some board games. We're just going to relax because you guys have so much going on, and just that opportunity to show them that, hey, I'm confident in you. You've got this. You can relax a little bit. Since everybody's sharing all these great ideas, I'm going to share one like right after the exams were over. I did not get out right after the exams. We had another month of school.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. There's people in New England and the
I
Eastern
know.
Seaboard who are going to go through June. It's
And
not
we'll be
something.
back the 1st of August. So
I
there's
know.
that.
I know. But one thing I loved to do, and the students really, really liked it too, is they would have to either stage or video or write and share with the class and what I called an offstage scene. So something from one of the novels or one of the plays that we had done that happened, but it didn't happen in the book. We knew about it. The best example that I would always give is like the death of Holden Caulfield's brother. It doesn't happen in the book, but it affects him and we know about it a lot. And so the kids would love that because they had to root it in the text, but they got to be creative and things. And so
That's so fun.
I totally ripped it off of a theater workshop that I went through one time. And it's like, oh, this is great. We can do this with anything. And so, we could have a whole other workshop though, and discussion about what we do after the exam.
Right.
So, but I see a lot of people dropping in some things here in the chat about what they do. I love doing the character superlatives. The kids do too. They have some fun and it's a good way to review some things. And it looks like some people really are, they're loving the interactive activities and the collaboration.
Mhm.
That's a lot of fun. And it just breaks the tension a little bit too. Okay. So James, I'm putting you on the spot. Off the top of your head, sir, one or two final things that students must remember for the exam.
Okay. I would say students must remember that doing bad on the exam does not mean the end of the world.
Oh.
Like, this is just one exam. Even if you do badly, it won't have a huge impact on the trajectory of your life afterwards. And like, even if you get like a 3 or a 4, there's a lot of colleges that still do accept like 3s or 4s for credit. So I'd say that's probably the most important thing to remember, that it's not the end of the world if you do bad on this exam. And then another thing that I would say is to just like try your best. Like, if you don't know the answer to something, at least like give it your best guess, because it can't like hurt you to guess on a question than to just leave it blank, which could hurt you. So
Mhm.
James, everything you just said is so important to so many people here.
Yes.
And to hear it from a student too is so important. Yeah, Dottie's calling. Yeah, right. You made some fans. Yeah, you should start a website. People will follow you. That's not what people do anymore. What do they do? Like a TikTok. You should start a TikTok. Just give advice. Okay. Yeah. So thank you for that, James. Susan, what are you thinking? One or two final things students must remember, and it's going to be hard to top James. I know.
It is. I mean, yes. Why didn't I answer that first? I'm just kidding. So definitely agree.
My fault.
Definitely agree with what he said. And specifically, like, James said, don't leave any answers blank. And like, for sure, all your multiple choice, you want to answer every question. But even for the FRQs, like if you're in a panic situation and say you only have, you look up and you have 10 minutes left and you've not started the third essay, my advice would be, instead of finishing that essay that you're on, go ahead and write a thesis statement and at least some type of summary, whatever you can get out, because instead of leaving that third essay blank, because a 110 on an essay is better than a 000. So, and the thesis point, I mean, pretty much we can all get that at this point. So yeah, don't leave your essays blank. Also in writing, I would just say you can't really overanalyze. I think a lot of times, you know, I hear students say, oh, I just don't want to I don't want to overanalyze something. I'm like, I promise that's not the problem. So just write as much as you can. That's not summary. Write as much as you can about the passage. Like, show us what you know. And again, focus on those parts that you understand, unpack those as far as you can. And don't get caught up on what you don't understand.
Thank you for that. Thank you. My answer to this, though, I could just go with what you all have said and be fine. But I will add to these things my one or two things. Complexity. They cannot forget complexity. They get so used to seeing me do this. This is tension. You know, I joke, I say, no, this isn't me trying to clap with my fists. This is two things that are butting up against one another. Literature has conflict because it reflects something about humanity. Even poetry, if that's not narrative, will capture something about the tensions or conflicts in humanity. And so I said there has to be a yin to the yang. So if you're saying, oh, this is about family, well, the texts are so rich. And Susan, I know you know this in the work you're doing on the committee. It's intentional. It's intentional that the texts are so rich and there's so many layers to them that they're not going to encounter a text that is one-dimensional, or they're not going to encounter a text that doesn't have that complexity. And it's in the prompt, you all. So the one thing I tell kids they have to remember is there's a complexity. And the second thing I tell them is because there's a complexity, look for the shift. If you can find a shift, it might be a big but, the way I tell them, look for that, but this, or a yet, or it may be a paragraph break somewhere. But those are the two things that I push for them. And if they don't know that by exam time, then I have failed them, because that should be a foundation of my course. But all the things you all said were fantastic too. That this is not going to define them. And I love that. All right. So we got a couple things dropping in over here. Michael saying something's always about something bigger. That's absolutely right. There's a bigger idea always, and that's in literature, we call that theme, right? Benjamin, symbolism is everywhere and the human condition is universal. I like that too. And it gets to those universal ideas and themes. My term, not the term that's in the CED. So feel free to drop in any others, y'all. As we move on, I'd love to know, Susan, and you've already touched on this a little bit, but what do you do to celebrate and build up your students getting into it, getting close to the exam?
I don't even know how to answer this really. I heard you ask Christy this, and I'm like, I don't know. What do I do to celebrate my students as we get closer to the exam? So, really, I think individually, like celebrating them when I can. And like I said, we just got back our last essays, and there was a lot of celebrating. I had students, like there's this one student, and he has pretty consistently written 1, 2 O's whole first semester. This semester, like probably end of February, March, 1.30, and this last essay he scored a 1.40. And I thought they were going to have to send somebody down to my room, admin, because he's like yelling, like he's just so excited, and I love that. So I think just celebrating, no matter where you are, every student in my class, no matter where they are right now, they've grown. They have shown growth, and everybody's on their own journey. And so just helping them think about how far they have come. And one thing that I do want to do is have them pull their first essay or second essay tomorrow and look at it and just think about exactly how far they've come. I know, a lot of people do like exam day routines. I have over 100 students. I do different things every year. For me, like cooking breakfast for over 100 kids is just not plausible, but I'll bring snacks and pencils and stuff like that. I've done different things. One year, I think year before last, I made one of my students in that class, like took a picture of me and like just the most unflattering, like, stance or whatever. And then, that kind of like circulated around the class, like it just became the class joke. And so I had those stickers printed out on exam day so students could take them into the exam with them and have it on their desk. So I'm like looking at them during the exam, and that was fun.
That's awesome.
During COVID year, I made these bookmarks for kids, and I think I may try to do this again this year. It's really interesting. You like cut out a part of a dictionary and you circle a word that reminds you of the student. And then, you put like, this is you. And
Susan, that would get me in trouble. I'm sorry. Like, I don't know. Sorry. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but there's always that one kid you're like,
yeah. And then then I'll put it on a piece of construction paper or whatever. I like doing that. My one, and so this is a long way to circle back to what I do to celebrate kids, but my tradition on AP Lit Day is, so before the exam, and that my students will do this Monday, my students write a letter to themselves that I'll mail to them, like snail mail. In 5 years, I mail it to them. So once my students go into the exam, that's when I pull the 5-year letters and I start, finding addresses, getting addresses, caught up, and I drop those in the mail the day of the AP Lit exam. So that's something that I do for me and my former students.
Yeah, that's great. I used to do the letter as well. But I would do it after the exam, towards the end. We'd listen to, I think it's Brad Paisley, If I Could Send a Letter to Me, the country song.
Yeah.
And we'd listen to that, and then I'd have them write letters to themselves. I'd keep them and I'd mail them 5 years later. It was great. But and I've had some pretty tearful responses from kids and parents when I've mailed those letters out. It's a great thing to do.
Yeah.
So, all right. So I'd love to hear some of the, what others do here, but James, like what was it for you that going into the exam, you felt boosted your confidence or made you feel like you were the most ready for this? Maybe it might have been something Miss Barbara did. It might have been you realizing, oh, I finally got that score I was trying to get. Can you think of one or maybe a couple things?
I would say, well, definitely I enjoyed writing the letter to myself, but I'd also say like activities that didn't necessarily relate to the exam that kind of also felt like a celebration, maybe of like accomplishments or just like kind of reward, like when we would go outside sometimes or do activities that involved going outside. Those felt really nice and fun. Or I remember Miss Barbara would do this thing where if you brought in a copy of your college letter of acceptance, she would hang it up on the wall in the classroom. So things like other types of celebrations for like things that might not necessarily relate to the exam, those kind of in a way made me feel ready for the exam, because it's like, that even if you don't do the best on the exam, like there's still other things that you're going towards in your life and other ways that you can be celebrated. So I think that kind of helped me feel ready for the exam too.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I think sometimes we lose sight of how important those things are that aren't exam related directly, but in building up the students we're working with. I know it's very simple. And I think a lot of you all probably do this, but as a teacher, I was teaching literature to seniors. I taught Lang and Lit to seniors. I would do pennants and have them make their pennants. But then I would also encourage them, hey, if you're not going to go to college or you're doing something else, make your pennant for the military. And then when they would get letters of acceptance, or in some classes, if they were when they filled out their application, we'd do a celebration. I would announce it and everything else, and people would clap. I think those things really, really matter to students. So thank you. And I see a lot of you all are sharing things over here. Students are sharing some things. And this one student, Melissa, looks like she's talking about her teacher, Mrs. Segovia, making a motivation poster and having it there as you walk into I do too, because the teacher's right there with you with that poster. I think that's great. Having a note and attaching a pencil and a pen to give to students. And I want to shout out to you all too. And a lot of students on here, I want you to know this. A lot of these things these teachers do for you or are giving you, remember, they're spending their own money on these things in a lot of cases. That breakfast was probably bought by the teacher. And so I want to acknowledge that. I recognize that. I'm sorry that you have to do it, though I understand and appreciate why you're doing it. So thank you all for those sorts of things. Teachers do need a raise. Shout it from the rooftop, Sierra. She's the one going to Bard. So maybe she can come out of Bard College and make something happen. All right. So something I wanted to share with you all before we move on, and Susan's got some stuff to share with you all directly. If you've been to my workshops, you've seen what I call book sheets or book cards. I use these towards the end for review. You certainly could use these over the next week. If you wanted to, you can email me and I'll send you the file. You'll also get a copy of this tomorrow. But this is just really getting students to think deeply about books that they've read and to use those for the review. So ultimately, you might keep these throughout the year as students read different books. But they track title and author, and then they have to come up with some thematic statements, some universal ideas, if you will. And then characters and change, conflicts, and who's involved, and the values related to those. There's so much in the course about values and the clash of values. And then on the back, we get into 10 significant moments in the text. And then some settings that matter, some symbolic ideas. So just ways to break down the text. Now, this can become painfully pedantic. I like to make it into games and use this for book walks and gallery walks and things like that related to books. This is a great thing for students to use to use to review the books for question 3. So you can check into those. A couple of things about let's be real. And this is for teachers, not necessarily for students. And I also need you to contextualize these things for your own well-being. Right? You have done enough for the students. Now, James, I see you shaking your head there and agreeing. I hadn't planned on coming to you, but I want to know what, and he's never going to shake his head again. What is it about this statement to teachers that's making you so emphatically agree?
Well, I think it's important to realize that you can help the students a lot, but a big part of it is the students taking their own initiative and actually wanting to do well on the exam. And if they just don't care, then there's nothing that'll change that. So I think it's important for the teachers to realize that you have done everything that you can, and not every student can get a 5, which is sad and unfortunate. And obviously we want every student to get a 5, but realistically, it's just not possible if every student doesn't care about doing well on the exam. So I think it's important for the teachers not to beat themselves up over whatever happens, and just know that you did not fail your students. And I think that's important. And
y'all, that's straight from a student. It's great to hear that perspective from students, because I know, James, as a teacher myself, and I think others, and Ms. Barbara, you tell me if you agree or disagree. Sometimes we think that students look at us like we've let them down. And that's so great to hear from you. So I really appreciate that. Just a couple of things I want teachers to remember. There will be good and bad surprises. There'll be kids that you expect to get a 5 who get a 2. There'll be kids who you expected to fall asleep and drool on the paper, and they'll get a 3. So it happens every year. For some kids, a 2 on the exam will feel like a 5.
Yep.
And it should for you too.
Yep.
An administrator might not recognize it. Not all administrators, good ones will. Not an administrator might not recognize it. Your department chair might not recognize it. A parent might not recognize it, but you know. And then I don't want this to sound defeatist. Somebody accused me last year of saying this, and it is saying it sounded defeatist. That's not the point here. I want you to know that if they don't know it by now, you've got less than a week. And so you can review some things, you can cover some things, but if they don't know it by now, you've done everything you can. And give yourself that grace, please. So the last thing I'll say is, remember, water your flowers. I take this from a former colleague of mine, and she'd say, sometimes we just got to water our flowers, because if you water the rocks, they're still not going to grow. And so at this point, you might just have to focus on watering the flowers, get whatever growth you can get out of it. All right, Susan, this is all you, ma'am.
Yeah, and I'm really not going, this is some things that I will go over my students. I'm not going to go tomorrow when we're doing like our final class. My friend Lisa Boyd says this, and now I say this. We start the year with this. We start the year talking about this. This class is all about the exam, and this class is not at all about the exam. And we come back and circle to that. We'll circle to this slide and talk about this tomorrow. Meaning, and I tell my students, if I've not done what I need to do to prepare you for the exam, I'm not doing my job. That's my job. And I want to do my job and prepare you for the exam. However, the skills you learn and the things that you learn to prepare you for the exam, they are going to serve you throughout your entire life. So it is really so much more about the exam that you're about to take. This is about, you have learned how to read information very critically and break it down and have really insightful thoughts on it. How much better would our nation be if everybody could read this closely and think this critically? And not only that, but like, y'all have learned how to write well and express yourself, and communication and being able to communicate your ideas in a logical manner, like that's going to serve you well throughout your entire life. So yeah, I want you to go and show what you know on this exam, but it's so much bigger than that. The exam is just a snapshot of these skills and the work that you've done that you're going to carry for the rest of your life. So we'll talk about that. And then you can click through these, and these are just quick reviews, and you're sending this slide deck out, right?
Absolutely. Everyone will
So
get
I
a
won't even
recording
go
of this
through-
presentation and the
Yeah.
slide deck.
So I won't even go through these, but I'll just quickly review. These are the things we've been working on for questions 1 and 2. For question 3, you can flip to the next one. We're really wanting to think about like small details and how those small details like affects these larger thematic ideas. So we're thinking big, thinking small.
Yep.
What's next? I talked earlier, and I just wanted to leave this for some people in case you wanted to use this with your students. But my students will, on a note card tomorrow, on the front side of the note card, they will write down 3 to 4 novels that they think they feel confident to write on. And then they'll flip that and they will think through their exam day plan, and they will actually write that out tomorrow. So I wanted to leave that with people in case you wanted to use that with your students. And I think the last slide that I
love
have.
this from Carlos. I love Carlos.
So Carlos Escobar, some people know Carlos and I, we made AP videos when everybody got out of school with COVID. I got to know Carlos, and I love what he says. And I'm just going to take a minute and read it because it's worth saying, but I think this is what we want to leave with our students. We cannot stress enough the value of you, the value of your words, and the value of your interpretation. That's what we want to hear. This is a very empowering process. The AP Lit exam is an opportunity for you to tell the world what you know, what you see, and what you think. And we just can't wait until you test so we can delve into that brain of yours and we can grow, and thank you for it. And this exam is giving you an opportunity to make an argument and to tell us, teacher, professor, Mr., Miss, doctor, so-and-so. It doesn't matter that I'm only 16, 17, maybe 18 years old. I've read this text and I have something to say. And then you have the evidence to back that up. Like, it is really amazing what our students are able to teach us, and what an honor to be able to learn from them. I feel like I learn more every year than probably they learn in my class. So this is what, the kind of sentiment and things that I want to share with them going into the exam. Like, it's your turn now. You go and you show what you know, and the world is going to be a better place for it. Sounds so cliche, but truly, how I feel.
Well, I'm so glad you included Carlos in this. I just took a picture of this and sent it to him. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to be part of this, and he's fantastic. And I'm so glad you mentioned the work you did with the AP Daily videos, because that's one of the things that teachers were mentioning in the last session and in this session that they were doing with students in that last week leading up to the review. And I encourage you all, if you've not checked them out, so many teachers I meet, they've gotten on AP Central or they've gotten on AP Classroom, but they've not used those. And so I encourage you all to check them out. They weren't just for COVID. They're helpful now. So I encourage you to check them out. And I know Susan put a lot of work into those, and a lot of people put a lot of work into those. So yeah, I encourage y'all, check them out. Okay, so FAQs and questions from you all. So if you've got any questions pending right now, I know there's some side questions going on about timing, and also about the sophistication question in the chat. We're not going to go off on that too much right now. But any questions you'd like to hear from me or James or Susan addressed, I'll go ahead and address a couple of frequently asked questions that I get. What if students don't finish the multiple choice questions? Here's the answer: bubble it all in. And the key is making sure you pick one letter and just bubble it all in. Don't randomly pick, because statistically they say, and it's not they say, statisticians will tell you that if you're better off if you pick one letter and go, because you could inadvertently be picking around the correct answers if you do it random. Must students do the essays in number order? No, remind them of that. They don't have to. We've talked about that a lot. James mentioned it as part of his strategy, and Susan mentioned it as well. Does the length of the essays matter? It doesn't, but it does. So really the goal is, and Susan, James, feel free to jump in. The goal here is development and making sure that they're explaining everything they need to explain. And I don't know why I have this about synthesis. It's the wrong thing. Can students mention text from the MCQ or other essays when they write their free response questions? Yes, you certainly can. I get this question all the time. I think this comes from students wanting to use those because they're fresh in their mind. But they certainly can. But make sure you don't go off and start writing about just those, and you're not analyzing what you're supposed to be analyzing. And teachers often ask me, what if I didn't get to all of the AP course and exam description units? It's fine.
You're
honestly good. When we put them together and we created them, units 8 and 9 are like icing, not even icing. They're like the cherry on top. If you get to unit 7, you're probably going to be fine. Unit 6, you'd be okay too. Okay, Susan, you agree with that?
Yep, 100%. I didn't get to all the units.
Okay, there you go.
But like even in your earlier units, like it's just hard to completely isolate those specific skills. Like you've covered all the skills, I'm sure.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so a couple of things as we're pushing towards the end here. This is sponsored by Perfection Learning tonight, and so these are the textbooks that worked on with Perfection Learning. Was a
Great
senior author
books.
on these with some great people. I think Susan was a reviewer. I know Susan
Yep.
was a reviewer
Great books.
on the literature book here. I'll also give a shout out to Susan's book at Bedford.
Norton.
Norton, not Bedford, sorry, at Norton. Nothing wrong with Bedford. It's just I
Right.
gave the wrong publisher. It's at Norton, and you all did a lot of great work on that, so you all could check
And
that
I will
out.
say, like, your book and my book, they work well together. They're not the same type of books.
Yeah, they do completely. I agree, because yours is a writing companion, really. And you know, writing about literature, I love it. The Applied Practice is another one of our partners. They do mock exams. I know that season has really come to an end as we get a week away from the exam, but it's something you could look into. It's great. You know, you think, well, I could do my own mock exam. They do full data readouts, and the people who do the readings of the Applied Practice exams are actual readers that they have recruited to do that reading. And so you're getting feedback from actual AP readers. And then some of you know Tim Freitas and I do our workshops in the summer through Garden of English. You can check that out. And this is a terrible picture of me when I had long hair. So Susan, you're doing some workshops this summer. I'm jealous of you getting to do AP by the Sea. That is so fun.
Yep, I'm virtual there.
I know. Still, it's a great one.
But yeah, so here's where I am. Brian and I are going to be in Vegas the same week. So that's going to be a fun week.
Yeah.
So if anybody's looking for an APSI, I'd love to have you.
All right. You can get Susan on Instagram or Twitter. You can also check out her and Brian's website, Much Ado About Teaching. They're doing some great stuff there. Please check them out. And if you don't know Brian Stobnick, I encourage you to check into him too. He's great. And Susan and Brian are two peas in a pod. They where one goes, so goes the other. I remind all teachers that we are risk takers and mistake makers, just like we want our students to be. All right. And I also like to have a little, stab of the dagger with this as people think about banning books. The books that the world calls immoral are the books that show the world its own shame. Do with that what you will. Here's my workshops this summer. I'm doing a few, but this is what I do, and I'm happy to work with anybody. I'm doing Lang and Lit. These are all hyperlinked. You can access them through this presentation. And with that, I encourage you to reach out, be in touch, and I'll stick around for a few minutes if you have any questions or anything. And I want to give a big shout out to James. Thank you so much, James. You have some fans now. You have anything else to say before we go?
Nope. Just good luck to everyone, and nothing bad will happen.
Great.
Well, and I just want to say how proud I am of James, and thanks for helping it. Like, you have no idea how helpful you are to teachers and students tonight. So thank you.
And James, make sure you look up Sierra Celeberti. All right. She'll be there next year. Okay. Sierra, look up James. He'll be around. So, all right. Thank you so much. Kristen, we'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, James, very much. Thank you, Brandon and Susan. Great information tonight. It's very inspiring to listen to all of you. I just want to remind you again that we will be sending out an email tomorrow that will have the entire recording and the slide deck included. If you would like to hear more from Brandon, be sure to take time to subscribe to the Next Step blog from Perfection Learning. You can find that at nextstep.perfectionlearning.com. And on the blog, there will be recordings of Brandon's past webinars, blog posts, lesson plans, and that's also a great way to stay in the know about future webinars. Tomorrow, when you get the follow-up information, it will include a 1-question survey that asks for your input as to future AP Lit or AP Lang webinars you'd like to see and what information you'd like to have covered. So please take the time to fill that out as well. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. Have a great finish to your week, and I hope you and your students have a wonderful testing experience.
Bye, everyone. Thank you again.
Thank you.